Peradventure it will be said in this point, as it is in the general, that although it is confessed by the Fathers that particular doctors are liable to error, yet in such things wherein the Fathers do unanimously agree, they have an infallible authority, and are a sufficient foundation of faith. To this I answer, first, if this were granted, it doth not in the least secure the Romanists' concernments, because there is not one of all those points controverted between them and us, wherein such unanimous consent can be produced, but in every one of them there are pregnant allegations, out of some of the Fathers repugnant to their opinions and assertions. This their learned men cannot but know, and if they have any ingenuity in them, they cannot deny. Secondly, I answer with Whitaker against urging this very plea. What a silly thing it is to deny that which happened to each of them cannot possibly happen to all of them. And with Gerhard, the testimonies of the Fathers collectively taken cannot be of another kind and nature than they are distributively. Nor can any man deny the truth of the proposition if he apprehends the meaning of it. Or how can the same persons, being onely considered under a double notion, be both fallible and infallible at the same time? And if Austin, Ambrose, Cyprian, supposing these were all the Fathers, be each of them fallible, how can a mere collective consideration of them render them infallible? Thirdly, I answer with learned Dr. Holdsworth that the Fathers deny this infallibility, not only to one or two of them dispersedly, but to all the ancients collectively considered. And this I shall prove only by one argument. They that make infallibility the peculiar property of the canonical writer deny the infallibility of the Fathers, either collectively or distributively considered. But the Fathers make infallibility the peculiar property of the canonical writers, and abjudicate it from all other writers. St. Jerome is express, except the apostles, whatsoever else is afterwards said, let it be cut off, for it hath no authority. And again, I make a difference between the apostles and other writers. Those always said truth, but these in something, as men did err. St. Austin makes this difference between the Holy Scriptures and all other writings, that those are to be read with a necessity of believing, but these with a liberty of judging. What living man can express the Protestant doctrine in more evident terms than the same Father elsewhere doth? That which is confirmed by the authority of the Holy Scriptures is without doubt to be believed, but for other witnesses and testimonies, whether more or fewer, agreed or divided, all is one to St. Austin. You may receive them or reject them as you shall judge. They have more or less weight. And again, when he was pressed by Jerome and the authority of 6 or 7 of the Greek Fathers, he answers thus, I have learned to give this honor and reverence to the books of Scripture, to believe there is no error in them. But as for others, how learned or godly soever they be, I so read them that I do not believe anything to be true, because they thought so, but because they proved it so to be by the Scriptures. To conclude, so evident is St. Austin's judgment in that point that it forced this ingenuous confession from a learned and acute papist, Occam by name, who, speaking of a passage of St. Austin's about this point, hath these words, It is to be noted that Austin, in that authority, speaking of other writers beside the penman of the Scripture, makes no difference among these non-canonical writers, and therefore, whether they be popes or others, whether they writ in council or out of council, the same judgment is to be passed upon them. You see, St. Austin's mind is plain, and doth, our adversaries themselves being judge, directly overturn that great fundamental point of the infallibility of councils and popes, which, if you will believe them, is not only true, but necessary to salvation, and yet these are the men that walk in the good old paths. These are they that maintain no doctrine but what hath been conveyed to them by the Fathers. I know no salvo but that which they use in the great article of transubstantiation, that is, to tell us we must not believe ourselves when we read such passages in the Fathers, and that together with the eyes of our mind, our reasons, and consciences, we must give up the eyes of our body to the Pope's disposal. And this doctrine of Austin's, if you will believe the Romanists, when delivered by the Protestants, is a new and upstart doctrine, never heard of in the world till Luther's days, and by this you may judge of the justice of that charge when the like is said of our other doctrines. I might fill up a treatise with pertinent citations out of the Fathers to this purpose, but this is enough for any but those who are resolved to sacrifice their consciences to the Pope's ambition, and for them it is too much. Section 7. The fourth and last argument is this. The Papists themselves, whatever sometimes they pretend, yet indeed do not make the Fathers the ground and foundation of their faith, but acknowledge them fallible. First, this appears from what hath already been discoursed concerning their avowed doctrine, that infallibility is the proper and peculiar privilege of the Church, and consequently does not and belongs not to the Fathers in their single capacities. Secondly, it appears from the acknowledged novelty of several Romish doctrines, which their most learned confess cannot be proved from the Fathers. Such are, number 1, the doctrine of forbidding the reading of the Scriptures to laymen, as they are called. We confess in their days, that is, of Jerome and Augustine, laymen were conversant in the reading of the Scriptures, saith Azorius. And whereas many popish authors expound those words, John 5, verse 39, Erxenanta, tas, graphos, indicatively, as if they did only acquaint us with the practice of the Jews, and not contain a command of Christ to his hearers to read the Scriptures. Tollet and Maldonet both witness that Chrysostom, Theophylact, and Augustine, and all weighty authors except Cyril, do understand it imperatively for a command of Christ. Number 2, they acknowledge the novelty of transubstantiation. The words of Scotus are these. Before the Lateran Council, the doctrine of transubstantiation was no point of faith, and the first Lateran Council was above 1100 years after Christ's birth. And Alphonsus de Castro delivers this memorable assertion. Many things are known to later authors, which the ancient writers were wholly ignorant of, for these seldom make any mention of transubstantiation. Number 3, the doctrine of indulgencies and purgatory. I join them both together as being near of kin, of which Bishop Fisher hath this remarkable passage. No orthodox Christian now doubts whether there be a purgatory, though the ancients seldom or never mention it. And a little after, considering that purgatory was for a good while unknown, and again, seeing that purgatory was known and received in the Church so lately, who can wonder that indulgencies were not used in the primitive Church? So Gabriel Biel, before the times of St. Gregory, and that was 600 years after Christ, there was little or no use of indulgencies, but now they are used so frequently, because the Church without doubt hath the Spirit of Christ, and therefore cannot err. What fine dubio did his work? For I was about to dispute against his assertion, but that phrase quite took away my courage. You see, it is a courtesy that the Papists will condescend to prove their doctrine from Scripture and Fathers, whereas if they would stand up upon their terms, they might argue thus. The conclusion without doubt is true, that the Church cannot err. Therefore, a fig for the premises. So Durandus. Concerning indulgencies little can be said with any certainty, because the Scripture speaks not expressly of them, and the Holy Fathers, Augustine, Ambrose, Hilary, Jerome, do not all mention them. And Cajetan expressly, no sacred Scripture, no authority of ancient Fathers, neither Greek or Latin, hath brought the rise of indulgencies to our knowledge. And yet, if you please to believe it, this and all the doctrines of the Romish Church are no other than such as have been handed to them from the apostles by all the ancient Fathers in an uninterrupted succession. I believe I could instance in 20 several articles of the Romish Church for which they have no color of authority from any of the Fathers, but this may suffice for a specimen of that respect which the Papists have for the Fathers, when they do not comply with their humours. The Fathers were so ignorant for a thousand years together that they did not understand, or so negligent that they did not instruct their people in that great mystery of transubstantiation, than which none was more necessary to be taught, because none more difficult to believe. The fathers were so hard-hearted and cruel that they would suffer souls to fry in purgatory for hundreds of years together, whom they might have certainly released by the help of indulgencies. The fathers were so indiscreet that they allowed their hearers to read the Scriptures and have them in a vulgar tongue. But now it is not fit to be granted, saith Sixtus Sinensis.